Alright, well, I wanted to start this video and make it look like all the other nerds on YouTube and film myself in front of my own computer monitor. By the way, I do use the word nerd here as an endearing term. So don't be offended if you're a little nerdy. I think it's a fantastic compliment in life. Hi, and welcome back to our YouTube channel, Fulfill the Game of Life. Today, I wanted to make the final video in the inflation series, and I've actually had some really good feedback from people. I appreciate that they appreciate the effort to really explain what's typically a complex subject in a more simple, straightforward way. And today I'm going to do once again to try to rise to the challenge of Einstein and explain as simply as possible the winners and the losers of the game of inflation. Before I kick the detail off in this video, I do want to add, I promised I was going to make a separate YouTube channel, and I accomplished that mission. So what I'm going to do is post videos in the future, financial videos on that channel, and I will probably post some small snippets on this channel just in case you're not following on the other channel. But it was a pretty interesting thing, right? The last video, part 3 of this, the day that I published this video, actually had 4 people unsubscribe from the channel, which honestly has never happened since the channel has opened. We've never had 4 people unsubscribe in a day. So we had 4 people who were basically giving a really clear message. I'm not concerned with the investment side and the inflation side and how that works. I just want to see Portugal. So I took my own advice, I created a separate channel, and I'm going to publish the next subsequent videos on both channels. The second channel is called No More Empty Pockets. To thank Christy for that title. I thought it was a good title. So as we go forward, I encourage you to resubscribe to the new channel if you're interested in this, and then we'll make this channel primarily, once again, Portugal. And we've seen some beautiful things here. We got some videos we're going to try to get up. As we said before, when it's Sesimbra, it's absolutely gorgeous here. This is a beautiful place, sunny every single day so far. I think maybe one day of rain in over 2 weeks, and the highs are right at 65 to 68. When you're in the sun at 65 or 68, life is good. I don't know what else to say. Now, just to do a quick review, if you watched the first video in this series, you know how the Consumer Price Index is actually calculated, what is told to you as inflation, and what inflation really is close to. If you watched video 2 of this series, you now know that the primary cause of inflation is actually monetary theory and, in general, money printing or the making of money that leads directly to inflation. Video 3, I completely forgot, so it couldn't have been that damn good. If you watched video 3, you are also aware of what the motivations would be for the government to actually give you a different inflation number than what the real world actually exhibits that we actually live in. And if you've watched the 3 of those, you understand one of the most significant designed monetary systems that affects your ability to retire better than you did before you watched the video, or at least I hope. In this video, we're going to pull together all of those concepts, and we're going to explain to you who wins and who loses in as simple of an explanation as I could come up with. Now, to kick off this video, just like the earlier 3 videos, I want to go back and just quickly review the quotes from some of our forefathers on how these systems work. So I'll once again start off with Henry Ford. It is well that the people of the nation do not understand our banking and monetary system, for if they did, I believe that there would be revolution before tomorrow morning. And the economist John Maynard Keynes, which, by the way, I don't know if I've referenced, but he is pretty much the father of modern economics. You'll hear it called Keynesian economics. And his quotes were, as we read to you before, by a continuing process of inflation, governments can confiscate secretly and unobserved an important part of the wealth of their citizens. And my favorite quote that really opened my eyes to this process, by this means the government may secretly and unobserved confiscate the wealth of the people, and not 1 in a million man will ever detect the theft. Now, I would like to say here, I really, that last part of the comment of 1 in a million man, I had to play with that a little bit mentally, because I've come to the conclusion, I actually believe that is probably true before YouTube. The American population, let's say, is 300 million people back a few decades ago. That would mean there would be only 330 men who were fully aware of the way that monetary theory had created a mechanism to steal from the common man. And I actually believe that's quite plausible. Probably about 330 people would have understood this, because it wasn't taught in class, it wasn't taught in college. You basically had to be employed in this world before it was ever explained to you. And thank goodness that 1 or 2 people who understood this took to YouTube and laid this out for us to learn, and hopefully you're trusting me and you're hearing this and you're also learning it as well. So I want to say thank you for those people, because I believe now that many more than 330 people in the United States understand how this system is designed. But I will have to say, I kept procrastinating a little bit to making this video, and I'm actually glad I did. There was an article printed just a couple of weeks ago from the Federal Reserve, and the quote that came from this article is one of, if not the most powerful quotes from the actual Federal Reserve. The author's name is Jeremy Rudd, and the depth of the article of trying to understand how we see inflation and whether it's real and those things really isn't for the scope of this video. But his quote from an author that is on the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve today, and this is his quote. Footnote number 2. Leave aside the deeper concern that the primary role of mainstream economics in our society is to provide an apologetics for the criminally oppressive, unsustainable, and unjust social order. Now, again, let me read that for the impact. I leave aside the deeper concern that the primary role of mainstream economics in our society is to provide an apologetics for the criminally oppressive, unsustainable, and unjust social order, in an article published in the last 2 weeks by a member of the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve. Now, I do want to spend one moment talking about the word apologetics. As it says in this quote, to provide an apologetics, that term basically means a way for people to rationalize in public the beliefs that something is true. What Jeremy Rudd is saying is the construct of modern economics in our society is to create enough noise around the process that you can't actually tell what's going on, and to make it sound as if the Federal Reserve has the best interest of all people in mind when they're on the news saying what they're going to do to monetary theory. So that in itself, one comment, is enough to once again give credence to this entire view of how the monetary theory affects people. And at the end of this video, we're going to find out that it does indeed affect everyone, some positively and some negatively, and there's some mix all the way through it. But how impactful is that to read a comment from the organization itself, but interestingly, not in the body of work, but in a footnote in the body of work? Now, I probably need to drink a little more wine to be able to read you a comment like that and maintain my emotions completely. But this way this system is designed and engineered is really remarkable. And we're going to tell you why, who wins this game and who loses this game. So let's get started. In our example, we're going to walk you through 2 people. We're going to name one the haves, and we're going to name the other have not. We're going to take these 2 people and we're going to put them in the world we're experiencing right now. Not just with the 7% inflation that we've seen historically, that's been reported to us at 2.5% inflation. We're going to use the inflation that's going on right now, that's basically undeniable by your own eyes and your own mind, that inflation is at least 20% across the board in the United States. though the last publication from the Federal Reserve is only 6% or 6.5%, and we simply know that's not true. The graphic I showed you just in the last video where the turkey has literally doubled in price from year over year, there is no way that what we're experiencing right now is only up 6% from the prior year. And if that doesn't cause you suspicion in itself, then you're just not watching what's going on. You watch every time that you buy groceries, you just don't quite register what the government's telling you and why. A little more getting started with the video. So what defines a have and a have-not? Well, it's pretty simple. The have-nots have no assets, and the haves have assets. Because what we're going to find is simply the winners and the losers of this game tie directly to the ones who own assets and the ones who don't own assets. When we say the haves and the have-nots, what percent of the population are we actually talking about? Let's hop on the computer here and I'll start walking you through the numbers. First of all is just a real quick look at who actually owns their house. I do believe probably the most primary indicator of a person that is a have-not is they're a renter, because the first step into the world of assets for Americans is typically buying their home. So today, 36% of the people pay rent, which means almost 4 out of every 10 people that you talk to in an average day actually pay rent and likely have little to zero assets and are truly a victim to this system. But I do have to say, probably the more interesting conversation is the stock market, because we are bombarded with information about the stock market. You hear about it on television. I used to listen to it every morning when I would drive just a short drive to work. I would hear what happened with the stock market. You hear it on the radio. You're bombarded with the stock market. So it must be important to everyone, right? Well, unfortunately not. Once again, it's a system that's basically designed to enrich the rich and has little concern with what actually happens to the have-nots. So here's the current data for the United States. As you can see here in the red chart, the bottom half of the people and how much of the stock is owned by the bottom half of the people. And you can see all the way back in 1990, it was almost 4%. So when you hear the news and they talk about the stock market, half of the United States population owned about 4% of the entire stock market back in 1990. And the economic crash in 2008, this ownership dropped below 1%. So half of the people in the entire United States, 5 out of every 10 people you met, had only 1% claim to all of the stocks in the United States. Now, the good news is that's drifting up a little bit, and someone might tell you, hey, in the last 10 years, it's gone from 1% to 2%, life's great. Well, the reality is it was twice as high just 30 years ago. So what does that tell you about the systems that are designed that run the United States? This monetary policy is the primary motivator for that. And just to understand it a little bit more, actually the top 1% of the entire population of the United States owns 31% of all of the value of the stock market, up from just 23% in 1989. So the disparity of wealth created by this system is accelerating at a significant pace. And I do want to actually read you this quote in the article. There are many reasons for the wealth gap: bad policy, globalization, technological change, etc. But one of the biggest reasons is because wealthy people hold the financial assets, and financial assets have done really well over the past few decades. And until you become the owner of assets, you are destined to work for the rest of your life. If you can force yourself into the world of buying assets, your whole world will completely change, and you will move from the exploited class to the protected class. So, in the world that we're in, 20% inflation today means the have-nots, everything around them, the food that they eat, the fuel, the cars, the electricities, the cell phone, the cable, the internet, all of that stuff, all of that yesterday cost $100, and now with 20% inflation cost $120. So the have-nots have actually seen an increase in their cost of living by 20%. Now, what about the haves? Well, they too have to experience what cost yesterday $100, now costs today $120. So both the haves and the have-nots experience the cost of daily life increasing by 20%. So what's the difference then? Sounds pretty equal. We're all paying the same amount. Well, here's where it breaks down. Now, let's take a moment to really understand a have-not. A have-not is a person who doesn't own their home. They work 50 hours per week. They come home from work. They pay for their food, their gas, their insurance, their rent, the cell phone, the cable, car payments, credit card payments, and so on, and 20% of taxes, by the way. And on the average, they carry a balance in their bank account of just a few $100s. That is their world. That is the way that their money looks to them every day, through every month, through every year. That's a have-not. So what about the haves? In the most extreme case, which we're going to take, because there's people between the haves and have-nots, and I call them the have-sums, and how much they have, just becomes kind of a continuation of this scale. But let me give you an example of the haves. And they have $1 million of assets that are making money for them. And the question is, well, how much return would they expect? Well, good investors would pull in 5, 7, 10, 15% returns. But this year, it's much easier for these investors to actually make return. Because of why? Well, monetary theory. Here's what actually happens, especially in a time like now. The Federal Reserve, with their money printing machine, prints enough money to devalue the dollar by 20%. But let's say that again to follow along our prior videos. They devalued the dollar by 20%. Now, one of the little subtle things I really wish I had included in an earlier video, but I'm just going to take a moment to add it here. I showed you the footage where Richard Nixon took the United States off the gold standard, and for the purpose of it being purely temporary at its 50th birthday, I believe. But what I thought was such an insightful quote from Nixon himself, as he explained to the American population the concern with devaluation.
What does it mean for you? Let me lay to rest the bugaboo of what is called devaluation. If you want to buy a foreign car or take a trip abroad, market conditions may cause your dollar to buy slightly less. But if you are among the overwhelming majority of Americans who buy American-made products in America, your dollar will be worth just as much tomorrow as it is today.
So what do you take away from that little inclusion into the presidential announcement to the American people? They knew devaluation was coming, but the logic at the time was, well, there's only devaluation if you don't buy anything internationally, if you buy everything from within the United States. And then, of course, we know a couple of decades later, we signed the free trade agreements, and we start buying stuff from all over, shipping out jobs that, laid into this. So maybe they really believed we were going to manufacture and live just within the borders of the United States. But if they really believed that, they were not very insightful. The haves also have to pay the 20% more for everything around them, but the assets that they're holding in their hand increases at the same rate that the dollar has been devalued. So someone with $1 million in assets, and the Federal Reserve prints enough to increase inflation by 20%, the assets of the haves increase by 20%. So what really happened to the haves? Well, the world around them cost 20% more, but their asset is worth 20% more. So let's make this more of a math game. Let's say that the average cost of every month of living for a family is $2,000. After a 20% inflation, it's now $2,400. The haves, also $2,000, and now their average expense is also $2,400. However, they had $1 million that has now been valued up by 20%. So how much money did the haves make just by money printing from the Fed? Well, 20% of $1 million of assets is $200,000. So the family of the have-nots, entire world, is 20% more expensive, and they own nothing to cancel it out. The haves, 20% more expensive because the cost of their monthly expenses is now up $400 a month, or $4,800 through the year, but they made 20% on $1 million worth of assets. They have a total profit of $200,000 minus $4,800, which is $195,000 of wealth increase simply as a result of money printing. So they are richer at the end of this printing cycle by the Fed than they were before, and they did nothing for it except watch the Fed print the money. Now, let's give a little context of what's actually happening here. The Fed's stated goal is 2% inflation, which in itself, by the Keynesian economics, is theft, but the Fed's stated goal of 2% inflation is one thing. But what happens in a crisis is the Fed doesn't want the economy to crash. But I want to spend a minute explaining, when people say the economy crashed, people don't really typically understand what the word means when the economy crashes. Because to the common man who was unemployed during the pandemic, did the economy crash? Yes, they lost their job. They didn't have enough money. They're worried about food. They're worried about their rent. The government steps in and makes it actually impossible to evict people from the houses, so at least they have a place to live. But the resulting positive side of this only happens to the people who already own the assets. So, let's say that you happen to be a billionaire, and after this year, how much more are you worth, although you did nothing? Well, you're worth now $1.2 billion. You made $200 million because the Fed didn't want the economy to crash. So what people need to mentally adjust to is when the Fed takes actions to prevent the economy from crashing, what they really mean is they don't want asset values to drop. They don't want the prices of the houses to drop. They don't want the stock market to drop. They don't want the prices of other assets, any real estate or those things. They don't want that to drop. So you could actually come to the conclusion that the Feds are working solely to maintain asset value and the value of capital around the United States by taking monetary action. And when they do that, what actually happens clearly, and as the example I just walked for you, is people who don't have assets, have-nots, end up paying a 20% tax on everything around them for the rest of their life. The people who have assets also have to pay the 20% increase, but they are rewarded with a significant increase in the value of their assets. So, what you can see is, if you have assets, you are actually highly protected. You're in a protected class just by the Federal Reserve's stated mission and the way in which they take action. If you're in the have-nots, what you have is an increase in your cost of living and a decrease in your standard of living, where things around you just cost more money than you make. And next year, when you get a raise, the government is going to explain to the nation that the CPI was only 5%, so you're going to get a 5% raise you're going to end up paying 20% more for everything around you, so you got significantly poor. So this system literally, in its truest, most basic sense, always mathematically provable, taxes the poor and rewards the rich under the guise of ensuring that the economy doesn't crash. So if you go back to the quote from Jeremy Rudd, the member of the Board of Governors for the Federal Reserve, and his footnote, I leave aside the deeper concern that the primary role of mainstream economics in our society is to provide an apologetic for a criminally oppressive, unsustainable, and unjust social order. Now, one of the things that completely surprised me, because I didn't really know how it worked, and I didn't really have much motivation to know how it worked, is the tax code is significantly written, once again, for the haves and the have-nots. And let me explain why. If you're a have-not and you have no assets and you go to work every single day and you earn income, at the end of the year, you'll pay the United States government 20 to 25, potentially higher by however much money you earn, but you will pay direct taxes on the money that you've earned income. Well, once you retire, and I was a bit shocked about this, you see how things work and that they're in the favor of some and not in the favor of others. The explanation of the tax code and how it changes once you retire is remarkable. It's absolutely remarkable. What I now understand is that passive income generated from all of these assets, are taxed completely differently than earned income. Taxing retirement income sounds like this. If you earn money from investments, there's two avenues. One is short-term, which means you bought it and sold it for a profit in less than 1 year, and there's a tax that is applied to that. However, if you buy an asset and you hold it for more than 1 year, and then you sell it, the money that comes to you is indeed profit, just like you went to work. But what happens here is pretty interesting. Until, as a married couple, you have made $80,000 from your investment in 1 year, guess how much taxes you pay? 0%. Until you have cashed out enough assets to generate $80,000 in your pocket, you literally pay 0 taxes. Which means, if you're a working person, going to work, paying your bills, paying rent, the government takes 20% minimum, 25% of your income for taxes because it's earned income. But if you're in the have bucket, and you're generating money off of money and doing absolutely no work, you pay no taxes. Is that shocking? Is it surprising now that you see both monetary systems, how they're built, and how they're built to favor the people who have money, but how they're built to penalize the people who work for a living? Well, that should lead you to a very simple conclusion. The tax code is written by the rich for the rich. And until you start making decisions to get you into the rich bucket, you'll keep paying those taxes and you'll keep being the victim of monetary theory. Now look, that is a lot of information and is, once again, not a rosy picture. However, it is what actually happens in the real world. This is the system that you live in. This is the result of rich people writing the tax code for the rich people, and it creates opportunities once you get there that just makes life really simple. But when you start poor and you have to work your way through it to see how it works, it's not such an easy road. So all of that said, I'm going to wrap this up by saying this is the system you live in. You don't have a choice. If you're going to live in the United States, and by the way, if you leave the United States, you still live in this system as long as your assets are there, number one. And number two, the tax code in the United States is only 2 countries in the world require you to pay taxes on income made outside the United States if you're a U.S. citizen. So I still have that privilege of the tax code if I choose to cash out more than $80,000 in a year. add one day to all the rest of the editing, and as you can see here on the screen, this video is a little bit over 30 minutes. And I just reminded myself yesterday there was one sub piece of this that is really worth an entire video, and I'll probably make it one day. But I want to just tell you that, believe it or not, this clear explanation of how assets rise and inflation rises with it, taxing the poor and enriching the rich, is not the end of the story of this design. But I'm not going to take an extra 15 minutes to tell you how this whole system works. I'm going to take a moment and just describe it in a few words. And if you are really inquisitive, I really encourage you to go research this yourself. But here is the deal. To understand the second side of this, you have to understand that when I say the Federal Reserve prints money, you have to understand how they actually print money and get it into the system. And as a real short explanation, the United States as a government says, I don't have enough money to pay for all the expenditures in my country, so I need to borrow money. So they reach out to the Fed. The Fed says, we have money to loan you, which, by the way, is really, frankly, disturbing, because the Fed truly prints money out of thin air, just as the quotes from the prior bankers state very clearly. They actually don't have money, but they buy the assets from the United States. And here's the worst part. This totals on top of the national deficit. And as U.S. citizens, we pay interest on the money printed by the Federal Reserve, which again is made out of nothing. So not only are you penalized with having to pay inflation on the front end of this process, you get the privilege to pay interest on a loan that was printed out of nowhere. That's a much deeper video for another day, but I'm going to get away from all of this. As you can tell, though, it really drives me absolutely insane. And just like Rudd stated, this is truly an unjust class war. It's basically a system built to impoverish many at the benefit of a few. One last really subtle piece on this is, once you figure out how this works and you understand that you're paying interest on loans for money that isn't real, you also become aware that the Federal Reserve, although the name would imply it's part of the United States government, is actually owned by private bankers. And these bankers, in their own bylaws, get a 6% return on money made from nothing from us as U.S. citizens. Now that you understand how it works, the next question is, how do we beat this? And can anybody do this? And the answer is actually yes. And we're going to start making the videos to show you how. As I've alluded to multiple times in this series, this knowledge should be an input to how you invest. Now, to leave you with a teaser for the next video, we're going to walk you through how we actually invest. We're going to talk about where our assets are, and we're going to show you the returns that we've had in the last year. But the teaser you need to understand is the return in the last year on our assets is 111%. That means our assets have doubled in value in less than a full year, honestly. Now, some of that becomes a little bit harder to calculate because of the way the assets work and whether you buy stuff and whether you sell stuff. But we're going to show you a portfolio that has returned 111% since January 2021 until now. And you also have already probably picked up that a significant amount of that return is simply because we're in a protected class and the Federal Reserve refuses to allow assets to drop, and in doing so they print so much money to devalue the currency that our assets are now growing like absolute hotcakes. Wait a minute. They're growing like a weed. Maybe it's the wine. So if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up, and again, be aware there is now a separate channel, and I'll continue to reference that channel. Would love for you to come by that channel and subscribe. Once again, it's called No More Empty Pockets. And we'll start walking in detail how to actually invest and how to get out of the not haves into the haves, and how to set your path forward for success. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you soon.